exam is in just a little under 2 weeks on the Monday night. If you hit up OnQ as of this morning, under the content section, you'll find links to 6 previous exams. So that's what OnQ looks like right now. Hopefully you know what the OnQ webpage looks like, right? So there's where your lecture files are. If you just hit content, this is the page it takes you to. Your previous, there's links to several previous exams here, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? So 7 previous exams over in this column. I tell you which of the questions are relevant to the course this year. There's some explanation of some of the exam questions down here, because the terminology that was used in some of these previous courses is slightly different than the terminology that we're using this term. Right, so you've got all of the exams. Not all of them. You have several of the exams. You can also find the exam cover page and the appendix for this year, which you might find useful. The appendix you'll find useful. The cover page is less useful. Right, so the cover page is here, so you can see, OnQ, why are you like this? Shift Control, there we go. Okay, so 3-hour length, right? 8 questions worth a total of 90 marks. Answer in the answer booklets, right? So don't write on the exam itself. Well, you can write on the exam itself, but no one's going to look at it. You'll get as many booklets as you need. Write your answers in the exam booklets. There's no aids, however. Right, student number, yada, 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 right? Everything else is just boilerplate. The appendix is probably what you're interested in seeing, right? So you get an appendix covering not everything, but a lot of basic bash scripting and a lot of basic C. Not everything in the appendix is relevant, okay? Because I just took the appendix from previous iteration of the course, and they may have done different things than we did. So if you see something that's not familiar to you, like linking, don't worry about it. It's not on the exam, right? But you get stuff like, what do you get? Like exit status, how to exit a bash shell, command substitution, right? How to write a conditional statement. Some of the common, what do you call these? Some of the common, I guess, tests that you can use in a conditional statement, right? Arithmetic conditional statements, how to write an if statement, how to write a while loop, how to write a for loop. I don't think they actually, no, she didn't. The arithmetic for loop is missing from here. So if you want to write the C-style for loop, you'll have to commit that one to memory. Right, so for double round brackets, and then it looks like a C loop after that. We didn't do shift. Turns out it's handy. We probably should have done shift, but anyway, we didn't do shift, so you don't need to use that. We did look at read to get input from the user, but as it says, you're not going to be tested on it, so there's not going to be write a program that sits in a loop and asks the user for input, right? That's not going to happen. You get some string stuff here, which is useful, right? So you get a fair bit of bash reference material. Now, you also get some C reference material, right? So how to make an array, right? Obviously, you don't get the basic stuff, right? Like you don't get how to write a for loop or an if statement. You've already taken a Java course and this course now, so if you can't write a for statement or a loop or an if statement by now, something's gone wrong, right? Using the heap. So we never really talked about the heap in the stack in this course. Using the heap is basically allocating something using malloc, right? So if you ever see in the old exams, it has to be allocated on the heap or something like that. They just mean it has to be dynamically allocated. You get creating strings. You get Printf Conversions, although you don't get all of them, right? So wait, do you get all of them? No, you don't get all of them, right? So if you want to know how to print an integer or a float, right, you have to remember what the conversion character is for those. Right? You get some simple reference on the string functions, and that's it. And that's actually all you need, right? So there's nothing on the exam that goes where you'd have to try to reference some function that's not on here, for example. Okay. Right. So don't go off and try to memorize all the standard library functions, right? It's not worth your time for the purposes of the exam. What else is on that page? Hang on, let's go back here. Exam cover page, appendix, and previous exams. All right, so we'll come back to the previous exams in a moment. Okay. The breakdown of marks. So there's about 20 of the 90 marks are related to bash, so that's 22.22222%. And then 70 of 90 marks are related to C. The style of the questions are all short answer explain or write some code that does blah, right? There's no multiple choice, there's no multi-select or anything like that, okay? For bash, this is what you need to know. So essentially, you were tested on a lot of this stuff already, but to write a bash script, you have to be able to do this stuff. So it's going to show up again a little bit. What you weren't tested on, though, were loops, right? So you should expect that the bash questions are going to ask you to loop over something, right? You need to know about command line arguments, how to access them, right? How to access them, how to use them. Some of the basic commands in some of the basic commands in Linux are useful, right? So things like cat, sort, I guess, maybe unique, or what else? Cat, ls, things like that, right? You should know how to use the basic commands. You don't need to know all of the options, right? Like, don't try to commit the options for ls to memory. It's not useful, right? If I'm going to ask you to list the contents of a directory, just use ls, right? Don't bother with trying to memorize the options, right? You should know how to do redirection. So how to redirect something to standard output, for example, standard error, or how to redirect to a file. You should know how to set the exit status of a bash script, right? You should know how to manipulate strings in a bash script. So that was assignment 3. You should know about permissions, how to set them, what they mean. No regular expressions, so don't worry about trying to understand or trying to commit all of the regular expression stuff to memory, right? You're not going to be asked to write a regex. That means you won't be asked to use grep either, right? So don't worry about regexes, right? I don't think it's useful to commit to memory, because whenever you're going to use it, you're just going to look it up anyway, right? So I don't think that's useful. Any questions about what's going to be on regarding bash? Right? Yeah.
So when we write a script,
yep.
like with a pencil?
Yeah. Everything's going to be. You have to write it all down, right? Anything else about bash? All right, C is easy because you're doing everything in C, basically. You can be asked about anything that we covered in the lectures, but I'm not asking you anything about processes, right? So the last 2 or 3 lectures, I won't ask you anything about that on the exam. Right, you didn't have an assignment for it, and there's nothing super intellectually interesting about the processes stuff anyway, right? It's kind of too bad. You really need to go a little bit deeper into this before you start to do anything interesting. But we didn't make it there this term. All right, I think it's, let's look at some of the old, who's looked at the old exams? Anybody? Oh, no one. Okay, so let's look at some of the old exams to see what the style of questions look like. So that'll be good. You're logged into OnQ already, so you probably, oh, hey, look, you don't have that. That's interesting. You have to log in. So if you're getting this message, you have to log in using your NetID. Let's see if this works. I don't know if this is going to work. I bet you it's going to ask for the 2-factor authentication. Don't save that, please. All right, so you may have to do that, and then you just hit the link over here, and there's your PDF. So this is from 2014. Right, so this would be a typical bash question. Right, so you're asked to write a bash script, prints the 3rd character of all of its arguments, all on one line with no spaces in between. Right, so if any of the arguments has fewer than 3 characters, print nothing. If there are no arguments, or if none of the arguments have 3 or more characters, your script may either do nothing or print a blank line, so it doesn't matter. Right, so for example, if you run your script 3rd cars, apple, XX, orange, Y, empty string, banana, right, you just take the 3rd character of each input, right? So the P, XX only has two characters, so you don't take anything from there. You take the A, right? Nothing from here, and the N, so you get pan, right? Notice that's the first question of the exam, right? It's worth 5. How much was her exam worth? 5 out of 45. So it's actually had a fairly large amount of weight. So that's like almost 10% of your mark on that one question alone, right? And so it looks like, I don't know if it looks like an easy question to you. It's actually a relatively straightforward question, but you actually need to know a fair amount to write this script, right? So what do you need to know how to write this script? You need to know how to access all of the command line arguments, right? Where's the chalk? So all of the command line arguments are provided to you in a list as $at, right? Or $, right? So that's your list of all the command line arguments, right? And now you have to loop over that list, right? So you need to be able to write a loop. So for S in $at, right? And away you go, right? And then you have to be able to figure out what is the length of each input, right? Of each string S, right? However, if you go and look on that handy dandy reference sheet, it's given to you, right? So scroll down, it's all right. So I would recommend you go over this reference sheet so you know what's on it, okay? So that you don't have to spend time looking at everything that's on there, right? There it is, length of a string. So away you go, right? So you need to know, you can check the length of each string S, and then how do you get the third character? Well, that's right there, right? So you can do indexing on a string using this funny notation, right, in bash, and then you're almost done, right? So you build the output string one character at a time, and then after the loop, echo the string, right? But there is actually a fair amount of basic stuff that you need to know in order to write down an answer for that question, right? But if you know all the stuff, then the answer to the question is like 5 lines long. Yep. Yeah. You can't print so there's no good way to do that. The best way to do it is to build the output string one character at a time, right? So for S in get third character, I'm just going to call it C, right? And then, so you're going to make the result up here. Result equals the empty string, right? And then remember in bash, everything's a string, and so you can concatenate just by assignment, right? So res equals $, squiggly braces, res, C, right? $C, sorry. $C, right? So build the character one string at a time. And then down here, for do, done, right? And then echo $res here, right? You should actually echo that quoted, because it's possible the third character of a quoted string is a space, right? So you don't want to, you want to suppress the string breaking, the space breaking here. Although I don't think it'll matter actually in the echoed output, right? That's it, right? So super easy if you know what you're doing, right? More or less impossible if you forget how to do that, right? Which is the problem in bash. So if you forget how to get all the command line inputs, you're kind of screwed, right? Yeah, it's important that you commit some of this basic stuff to memory, right? Incidentally, if you do forget how to do that, right? Write the loop for S in blah, do something, stick something in there, and then put a note in saying this is what I wanted to do, right? I wanted to get all of the command, I wanted to get the list of all the inputs, but I forgot how to do it, right? Because that lets you continue, right? You're not, obviously you'll lose marks because you forgot how to do that, but at least it lets you continue the rest of the loop, right? So if you forgot how to do that and managed to get all of that done, what was that worth? She gave it 5 points. I mean, you'd probably get 4 or 4.5 out of 5, right? And that's it. All right. So that's actually, this is a really good example of a question that you might see something similar like this on the exam, right? Tests you on tests you on a lot of basic stuff, right? How to write the loop, right? How to access the arguments, how to check the length of the string, right? How to do indexing and concatenation here, right? So it's actually a very good question. Next question is pretty similar. So you have a program called compute. It takes in a file name as a parameter, prints out as integer. That's it, right? That's all you need to know. So there's some program called compute. You give it a file name, prints an integer. Right, your job is to write a bash script that assumes each of its arguments. So again, right, each of its arguments is the name of a file, calls compute with each of the files. Right, and then your script must print 2 lines stating the sum of all the values printed by successive calls to compute, blah, 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 right? So again, the structure is going to be similar, right? You're going to have a loop over all the inputs, and you're going to call compute inside the loop, right? What else is relevant on this exam? Question 1. Question 3, 4, 6, and 7 on this particular one. So let's look at question 3. What's question? Oh, question 2 is grep, find, sed, right? So we didn't do sed. In grep and find, you use regular expressions. I'm not going to ask you about those. Right. Basic C. Oh, this is one of the questions I said I wouldn't ask you. This one prompts the user to enter in one or more integers, and then I think it reports the difference between the last 2 integers entered. Right. So this is actually very easy to write. You just use, as long as you can get the input from the user, right? This is a very easy question to answer. I guess you need to know how to convert a string. Well, no, you're asking numbers, right? What does it ask you for? When the user enters a 0. Oh, you may ignore the possibility of I/O errors or input in non-integer format, so that you don't even have to worry about that, right? So that's basically asking what's required there. You need a while loop. You need to be able to read something from input, right? And then you need to be able to do some basic arithmetic. This is true in general. You don't have to put the include statements in your code, right? So don't bother trying to remember which function is in which header file, right? Just leave the includes off, right? Don't worry about it. For some reason, oh no, it's not here. There's probably a question on here about make. Yeah, there's a question here about make. Don't memorize how to use make, okay? Almost all the exams have a question about make. I don't care if you've memorized how to use the make utility. Pointers, arrays, and strings. So look, this is basically the quote unquote hard stuff in C, right? Is working with pointers, manipulating strings, and using arrays, right? So you need to be familiar with all 3, right? Basically. This one's basically asking you to write a version of string cat, right? So remember string cat, you take 2 strings and it concatenates them together, but string 1 has to have enough room in its array to hold all of the characters in the concatenated string, right? Which kind of, that's kind of awkward to use, right? So instead, they want you to write another function called string merge. String merge takes 2 null terminated strings and returns a newly allocated string, right? And returns the concatenation of the 2 strings in the newly allocated string. Right? It says it must be allocated on the heap. That just means you have to use malloc. Right? It shouldn't change either of the strings. It even says you can use string cat if you want to, which you should. Right? So what's the trick in this question? The trick in this question is, can you get the length of the 2 input strings? Right? Can you make an array big enough to hold, right, all the characters of both input strings plus the null terminator? Right? So remember, with strings, you always have to worry about the null terminator. Right? So can you use malloc to allocate an array of the appropriate size? If you can, you're done in like a minute and a half. Right? So this question is very straightforward. It takes you longer to read the question than it would take you possibly to write the function itself. Right? Can you get the length of the string? Well, that's string length. Right? Add the length of the 2 strings together plus 1 and malloc the array. Then use string cat to concatenate the arrays into the string. Use string copy to copy the first string in, and then use string cat to concatenate the 2 strings together. Right? And that's it. You're done. Right? So all of this stuff here it's all very it requires you to understand the basic functionality of all the C functions and how strings work, right? Strings and arrays. 5, make, we don't care about. 6, I/O. I/O we care about a little bit, right? So you should know how to open a file, how to read it, how to close the file, possibly how to write to a file, right? So open, write, close, right? So you should know the basic functionality of printf. And of course, you should know printf because you have to print stuff in some places, right? But other than that, there's nothing. Oh, and you'll need to know how to read in a line of input. So this question is asking you for line-oriented input, right? If you're doing assignment 6, you know how to do line-oriented input, right? So I think I forgot to tell you that. So if you, a good place to, a good thing to do would be to review the assignment questions, right? So a lot of the stuff that I ask you in the assignments, some of it will show up again on the exam. Program to be bash utility, right? Okay, that's fine. Structs, I mean, you need to know how to make a struct, right? And you need to know how to create a type def to a struct, right? So this one is actually, this is a singly linked list-based structure in this question, right? So this is similar to the queue and the stack that we implemented, right? So I think we did both with a linked list, right? We did one of them with a linked list for sure. Right, so this is the exact same thing all over again. You've got some sort of linked structure, right? There's your node, there's your type def, right? And this one asks you to actually write, what is this, list total. Okay, so this is easy. So this one asks you to sum all the elements in a linked list, right? So you need to know how to iterate over the nodes in a linked structure in this particular question, right? But that's, again, if you understand how the link structure works, that's very easy to do, right? Processes and signals, we're not talking about that. So you can see, the question here is, if you actually look at the question, I mean, this is basically the only type of question we could ask you if processes and signals were on the exam, right? It's not super interesting, the type of question that you can be asked here. And then they had a lot more summary. They had like, what is that, like 10, 15 pages of summary? It was kind of wild. So they had a lot of stuff. You don't get as much summary information here. All right, you want to look at another exam? Yes, no, yes, yeah, okay. Let's try, oh, so this was written by another person. So this was written by a teaching adjunct, I believe a postdoc or a graduate student. So you're going to see these questions are way different than the ones from the other exams, right? This is also a very funny exam because when you look at the questions, so they're question 1 and then it's A, B, but the parts aren't related at all. Right? So question 1A is not at all related to part 1B, so I have no idea why they were organized this way. Your exam's not going to look like that. If you get a question that's multi-parts, each part, they're all related to one another. Right? The questions are set up so that if you can't do part A, you can still do part B and C and D, etc. Right? So you do not need to answer a previous part to answer a subsequent part. Right? You can just assume that the previous part was answered and you just carry on. Right? Right, so what's the relevant one here? 1B, 5B, 6B, 8B, 9B, okay. 1B, write a bash script that takes a number of integer arguments and sums the even numbers together and the odd numbers together, writes the output. Right, so again, it's going to look like that, right? To process all of the input arguments. He actually, the instructor actually suggested some time on each question. I'm not sure, like 15 minutes to answer this question is a long time. So I'm not sure the timing information here is accurate. What else is there? Version control, we didn't do that. IP stuff, we didn't do that. This was a very interesting variation of the course. It was taught at the same time as another section, but the two sections were completely different. So you'll find two exams from the same time period. 16, 17, these were both taught at the same time, but the courses were like completely different courses. Where did the exam get to? here, okay. What's this? 6b, write a script that reads a number of words from the user using the read command. Okay, so use read, which I told you I'm not doing. Stores them in an array, checks if each word in the second half is the same. So that's fine. You need to know how to use an array in this case. Right? I don't think I actually asked you about bash arrays on this exam. So perhaps this one's not so relevant. Where is the table again? Sorry. 5b, 6b, 8b, and 9b. Okay, 5, 6, 8. 8b, right, they did unions. We didn't look at unions in this course, so don't worry. If you see anything about a union, just ignore it. So write a C program that reads a number from the user, calculates its factorial, right? So n equals n times n minus 1 times n minus 2 down to 1. Right, so that one you need to be able to access the C command line arguments, and that's basically all you need to do, right? That and write a loop. That, write a loop, convert a string to an integer, but you just use that a to I. 9 code, right? So here's an example of a question where you have they give you a program. It's got a bunch of errors in it, and then you go in and fix each of the errors. Right? I mean, that's an okay question. You won't see a question like this on the exam. Right? But this is a useful exercise because it does, it forces you to identify what's gone wrong in this program. That's the last one in that one, actually. Yeah, that was I have to say, that was a very strange exam to me, for my eyes. 1, 2, 6, 1, here's, I guess the one, 1, 3, 5, 6, 8. So there's quite a few here. Oh, this is also written by a different person. Okay. When you develop a C program? Yeah, this question. I remember this one now. This one's, it looks like a C question, but you notice up here it's actually bash. There's an explanation for this on the on-cue. So it's asking you to write a script that compiles a C program. Okay, so this question here, it wants you to write a script that can compile a C program. The C program consists of exactly one file, right? It changes the permission of the output of the executable file so that the user can run it, right? So and they can execute it. And then there's an error in the question because it says that you need to change the permissions of you need to add the path. You need to add the directory that the file is in to your path, right? So right here, so right here. Finally, your path may not include the current directory from which you need to run or execute the program. So you need to take care of this issue too in order to be able to run your program. You can't actually change the path from inside a bash script. It does not work, right? Not when you run it like this, right? So I'm not exactly sure how they were expecting the student to change the path. So that was a bit odd. So ignore that in this question. So what is the question really asking you to do? So you take in, so that's your input, right? You need to compile the program, the C file myprog.c, right? So you have to make the variable, some variable that adds .c to the end of it, right? Then you have to invoke the compiler, right? So gcc -o myprog, right? Myprog.c, right? Straightforward. And then change the permission on the output to be executable, which you normally don't have to do in Linux, right? Normally, when the compiler runs, it produces an executable file already. But that's fine. It's just change mod, right? Change mod u plus x myprog, and you're done, right? But what do you need to know how to do here? You need to be able to read in or how to get that argument from a bash script, right? How do you get that argument from a bash script? Well, it's just $1, right? So that's easy. 1, 3, 5, and 6. I did it again, sorry. 3 is basic C and pointers, right? So this is I mean, this would be a reasonable question to see on the exam. Right? It's just trying to determine whether or not you can figure out if you understand the difference between a pointer to a variable and the variable itself. So basically, they give you some code, and they ask you to write down what does it print. Right? There's nothing super complicated here. Right? There's no pointers to pointers here. Right? So there's nothing that's going to break your brain. Everything's either a plain old pointer to some int, right, or it's the int value itself. Okay? So there's nothing super complicated here. I think it's also trying to, yes, right down here. So also it calls the function with x and y, right, and the address of x, so it passes in a pointer, right. So the other thing this question is trying to get you to figure out is what happens when this function returns back to the main method, right? Does the value of x or y change, right? Y can't change, right? Because the function doesn't get a pointer to y, right? Remember, a function cannot change the value of the caller's variable unless they get a pointer to that value, that variable. Sorry. Right, so they get a pointer to x, so the only thing that might change in here is x, right? So that's the other thing this question is looking for. Another make question. These are weird exam questions. I don't know why anybody would ask you to spit out a make file on an exam. Anyway, arrays. So again, right, arrays are it's the fundamental collection in C, right? So you need to know how to work with arrays. Right? What do they ask you for in this case? Write a function that verifies if a given string is a number or not. I see. Okay, so they want you to, they want your program to take input one string, and then they want you to parse the string character by character to determine if it might be a number. Right? And it says stuff like this. Right, so 152 point something, point something, point something is considered to be a number, right? So this is pretty straightforward, right? You get the string, so you need to know how to use argc and argv, right? So the two inputs to a C program, to a C main function, right? So you get the string, you get the length of the string, you parse the string character by character, right? If the character is a digit or a period, the answer is still true, right? If a character is not a digit or not a period, the answer is false, right? I don't know how sophisticated they were expecting the parsing to be. So I don't know if you wrote point, like decimal, 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 that's supposed to be not a number. The question doesn't say, right? I suspect they didn't care. So all you're looking for is whether or not a character is a digit. You've got a function that does it there, right? Or if it's a period, right? So C equals dot period, right? So that's easy to do. But what else did it? I don't know why is it called an array? Following is yeah, I don't know why this is an array question. I mean, you're iterating over a string, I guess, but all right, whatever, sure. Structures and pointers. Oh yeah, it took me like 10 minutes to read this question and figure out what on earth they wanted. Read the explanation on OnQ, because it was a really weird question. So here, question 6. So look, they want you to, this was such a strangely worded question. Okay, so look, they want your program to generate this output, okay? Fine, all right, I have to generate this output. And so it looks like every car has a make, a model, and a year, right? So that's what you're supposed to infer from this output, right? So they want a structure. They want you to make a struct where you can hold the make, the model, and the year for a car, right? So that's what they want, number one. Number two, they say you should make a function that can print, well, they say this, blah, right? But what they mean is they want you to provide a function that can print a structure where you pass in the structure by a pointer, right? So that's what they're asking you for. 3, collecting the data about the two cars can be done either twice using a for loop. What they mean is they want you to write a main method where you define two structures that have these two values, right? And then finally, your program prints the two structures, right? And that's all they want you to do. So that's not a So that's not a super hard question. You just need to know how to define a structure, right? It's also not clear. Yeah, it's also, they don't specify anything else. So they don't say, for example, the make of the car has a certain length, right? Because this is a string, right? So you have to, when you make your structure, you have to decide whether you want a fixed size array here or not, right? And it's not clear from the question whether it should be a fixed size array or not, right? So in other words, it's not clear whether or not they want you to write the following struct. Car make some number here, right? Like that? Or do they want you to write or do they want car star make? Right? So it's not clear from the question which one they want. You can make either one work. If you go with this route, right, when you fill in the make, model, and year of the car, you have to malloc an array, right? So, right, if you go this route, it's a lot easier, right? You use string copy and copy it into the array, right? Whatever you do, though, whatever you do, don't write make equals something, right? So that's the trap in this question, right? You don't want to write that. Processes, signals, and pipes, we're not doing that on the exam. Oh, there's a bunch of multiple choice questions here. The multiple choice questions are fine, but you're not going to see any on the exam, right? So, I mean, if you want to look at them and try to answer them, go ahead, right? But they're not going to be, you won't see a multiple choice question on the exam. Also notice that they're using a very, very old standard, C standard here, right? That's not a legal main method in C99. That's old K and RC. So way back from the 80s. Yeah, so like I said, the multiple choice questions are fine. This one's cute. I guess we should look at this one. So also notice they now switched to some other version of C here. So now main returns an int. But anyway, so their x is a float variable, right? Then x is defined as 7 divided by 5. It's hard to read, right? So that's x. X equals 7 divided by 5. Right, and then it prints out the value of x with a new line. Right. Who thinks the answer is A? Anybody? Anybody? B? How about C? D? Anybody? Okay. %f, so by default it prints out 6 digits after the decimal place, right? So it's one of A or B, right? The only question is what is 7 divided by 5, given that x is a float, right? And that's the trap in the question, right? It doesn't matter what the type of x is. It's the type of the 7 and the 5 that matter, right? Same as Java, right? So that's an int, that does int division, right? 7 divided by 5 and int is 1. So the answer is B in this case, right? Again, so yeah, so like I said, the multiple choice questions are fine. You can look at them if you want to. You won't see one on the exam. Had enough, or do you want to look at another one? Anybody? You care? You want to look at another one? Sure? All right, let's take one more. I guess this is from last fall? Last winter? Yeah, last fall. 2, 3, 4, and 5. Oh, sorry, shift. No, I haven't taught, this is the first time I've taught this course. Shell scripting. Count lengths. Okay, so bash script takes in one argument. Should be the name of it. Oh, this one's, we didn't do this, but I mean, you could answer this. This is an interesting question. So you have a bash script. It takes in the name of a directory. All right. The script must add up all the lengths of all of the file and subdirectory names in that directory, right? And print the total, right? So not the sizes of the files and subdirectories, but the number of characters in their names. Right, so basically it wants you to somehow list the contents of the directory, right? And then go through all of the list the contents of the directory, including the directories in the directory, right? And then somehow print out the length of the names of all the files, plus the name of all the directories, plus the length of all the directories. Okay, so this one says if there are subdirectories, don't look at the files inside of them. There is a question on one of the exams where it asks you to go into the subdirectories and the subdirectories of the subdirectories and the subdirectories of those subdirectories and so on and so on and so on. Right? You can do that with recursion, and the question says you should use recursion to answer it. Don't worry about doing that on this exam. If the argument is not the name of a directory, your script should write error. Okay, so you have to do some simple input checking, right? And then return a non-zero exit code. So you have to know how to use exit, right? If the argument is the name of a directory, your script should return with an exit status of 0. So if you call count lengths, right, it should somehow count the length of the name of each file / subdirectory, right? So counting the length, or keeping track, or summing the length of all of the file names is not hard, right? You just create a counter that started at 0 and then just add the length of each file name, right? Getting the length of a file name is also not hard, right? Because there's how to get the length of a string is on that cheat sheet, right? The hard part in this question is how on earth do you get the name of all of the files and subdirectories in a directory, right? Because we're not doing this time, right? You're given all the inputs on the command line. Right now you have to figure out how do I get the contents of all of the, how do I get the listing of all of the files and file names, right? So I'm not going to tell you how to do that. You can work it out. I'll provide you with answers later on, right? I'm not going to do it here. Anybody know how to do it? Incidentally? Yeah.
Do you want to say it?
Sure. So what would your loop look like?
I would say for the file name in $sign, parentheses, and then ls, $1 maybe? I guess $1 is the name.
That'd be good enough on the exam, right? So ls, so you're going to use command substitution, right? That's what you're doing here, right? Command substitution for ls, right? So call ls, take the results of ls using command substitution, right? Also works, right? So remember that it's a shell. You're in the shell, right? So the shell knows what the wildcard means, right? That's all the files. That's the name of all the files in the directory. Right? Either one would be adequate for this purpose. Now, the funny thing is how these two are interpreted. Whether or not you get the // in front of a directory name is up to question. I don't think either of these will give you the // in front of the directory name, so I don't think it matters. Both should work. I also don't know how picky they are on this question. Neither of these will list the contents of the hidden directories, of any hidden files. So I'm not sure how particular they are in this case. Right? If you want the hidden files as well, dot star. Will give you all the hidden files. Right? Another array question. Okay, so that's fine. So this one is, this one's almost the same as one of the ones we talked about. You take two arrays as inputs. You're given the size of the two arrays. Produce a new array and return the new array where the new array is the sum of the values in the two input arrays. Right? So again, this one's a malloc question. Right? In your add arrays function, you're going to malloc an array of size 3 of type int, right? And then sum the values in the two input arrays and store them into the new array. Another structure question, right? So this is actually similar to the one we just talked about a little while ago. So it's a linked list type structure. right? And now you have to implement a method, a function that deletes the last node of a linked structure, right? This one's a little bit hard for this particular course. It's not super hard. It's a little bit hard. So you need to figure out how you delete the last element of a linked structure, right? Given that, wait, we did a queue, right? As a linked list. So that will tell you, that'll give you some hint as to how to do this, right? So that's going to be similar to dequeue, except you're dequeuing in the front. Here you're dequeuing at the end. Right? There's a special case where something happens when you remove the last element of the only element of a list, but that's it. So this is another read some input, do something with it. Processes we're not doing on the exam. That's it. All right, so I will try for next week to post answers to most or all, if I can, of those questions, or my answers anyway. I don't have the actual answers, right? So I don't have the old sample solutions. So it's going to be my interpretation of their questions. But I think that'll be useful, right? And that's it. Anybody else have any other exam questions? Yes?
Which exam is yours closest to? Like in terms of similarity, because they are very different.
Well, they sort of are and they sort of aren't. So all the ones written by Dr. Margaret Lamb are pretty similar. It's the two that are, it's the one, this one's very odd. I think this one's odd. So I think the 2016-17 one with the A, B type questions are odd. The questions that I'm asking you are closer to the ones written by Dr. Lamb. They're not exactly the same as hers. So her questions are very open-ended. I tend to break mine down into parts so that you can do individual parts of the question and then not, so that your overall answer doesn't rely on you getting everything right. So that tends to be the way I structure my questions. Okay. Anybody, any other questions? All right, I guess the next time I see you will be during the exam. Office hours. Anybody want office hours during the exam period? All right. How many do you want and at what time? Don't say the morning, because I don't like mornings. I hate mornings, and I got an 8:30 class.